Welcome to this NHS Lambeth CCG Meeting Skills video workshop. The purpose of this workshop is to encourage you to consider the role you play in meetings and how you can make even more of a contribution to a healthy meetings culture at the CCG. There are many aspects to a successful meeting, and we will be looking in particular at one helpful approach. The first thing we would like you to do is to watch a 5-minute extract from a fictional meeting and consider the contribution being made by each of the characters. What do you think is working well, and where do you think there may be room for improvement? The purpose of this meeting is to consider the future of a service following a 2-year pilot programme, but try to resist being drawn into the detail of the discussion. Instead, pay particular attention to any roles or functions you notice people playing in the meeting, and the balance of dialogue. The extract lasts about 5 minutes, after which there will be an opportunity to reflect on what you've noticed.
Great. So I think we're all agreed on that. I believe the next point is yours, Adam.
Yes, the eye service. So we need. Hopefully you've all got the paper.
Yeah.
Haven't got that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we need to make a decision on the future of the eye service or not. So as you will know, we've got 4 options that we've put together based on all the information that we've managed to gather, and we need to make a recommendation of one of those 4 options. My own personal view is that the service has been a huge success, both in terms of the data that we're getting back from patients and from some of the anecdotal information that I've received from talking to people. The idea of patients being able to receive this service out of hospital in the community is something that's really gone down well. So I think it's, for me, it's a no-brainer.
I'd agree with you, to be honest, Adam. I've heard nothing but good stories about the service, and obviously from a business perspective, it's been a real success with the savings, and from patients, we've heard nothing but praise for it. So yeah, absolutely, I think you're spot on.
Good.
I do think we do need to think about this a little bit more. I understand what you're saying in terms of from the customer perspective, absolutely, from our patient's perspective. I was just wondering in terms of from the business perspective, because obviously, you know, when we devised the service in the first place, we had a projection in terms of what the cost savings would be. And, you know, 2 years down the line, we're only at about 50% of that. So it's not quite there yet.
That's a very good point. Any things on why that is at this stage, Adam?
Yeah, we made a slower start than we thought we would. I think perhaps we were a bit ambitious in terms of the way that we thought the service would hit the ground running, and we had some initial expenditure and some initial sort of trying to get some traction that we struggled with. Now we're starting to see a real take-up of the service, and my feeling is that as word on the street, almost, that kind of people telling the good news stories about the service spreads, that I feel that by the end of the next cycle that we're going to be pretty much up to the projections that we originally made.
Yeah, I think we're heading that way, aren't we? I mean, startup costs have now been absorbed, and as awareness grows, and we had an absolute spike when we put a bit more oomph behind the awareness campaign, about 9 months ago now.
So we might even have a look at another awareness campaign actually.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I agree. There's been activity, and it does seem that to the most part that activity has been positive. I guess one of the things that we should think about is in terms of raising that awareness, whether we're going to find a bouncing of activity coming from our patients.
Okay. What do you mean by that, Deborah?
Well, I'm concerned about whether we're going to see, patients bouncing from the service back to the GP, back to the outpatients.
That's a really good point, actually, because from a financial point of view, that is not good news.
I hear your concerns, and I feel that you both got some fairly strong views about how we kind of take this forward, but I think we can agree that patient satisfaction is high. We've certainly seen a reduction in outpatient attendance. And I think there are some concerns of yours that we need to address going forward in terms of which of these paths that we take. So can we look a little bit more in detail about some of the figures, and then let's see if we reach some agreement about that going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I mean, I can respond to you about the case mix.
Pause the video now and consider what you liked about the meeting, what you didn't like, and what you noticed about any roles or functions being played by particular individuals and the balance of dialogue. There may be elements of the conversation you felt could have been better handled, and you may have felt that the meeting was quite productive with a good balance of support and challenge. In the meeting we just watched, each individual was taking on a particular position or speech act. Adam was the mover. His role was primarily defined by initiating action and defining ideas. Susie was the follower. Her role was one of appreciating, adding and expanding on others' ideas. Deborah was the opposer, so she added different views and played devil's advocate. And finally, Pete, who in this instance happens to also be the chair of the meeting, was the bystander, reflecting, giving feedback, seeing and naming. This way of identifying how we contribute to meetings comes from the work of David Cantor, a family therapist. Cantor had an idea that patterns he had seen in families might also apply in organisations. He developed an approach which he calls structural dynamics. The element of structural dynamics we will be focusing on is sometimes referred to as the four-player model. Cantor proposes that being attuned to the signals in a conversation makes people more effective as leaders. They can read the room and intervene to unstick things, to move things on. He suggests that in any situation, unseen and unspoken connections between people influence what happens. So the model he has developed is a model or theory for understanding how people talk when they make decisions together. Conversations work best when all four positions are being occupied. You don't have to stay in one position, but can move around. In fact, the most skillful conversationalists move around and can read what is required in the conversation. For the purposes of the meeting you just watched, we asked the individuals to predominantly stay in single speech acts or positions to help with identification. Let's watch the scene again and to consider the speech acts represented by each character.
We made a slower start than we thought we would. I think perhaps we were a bit ambitious in terms of the way that we thought the service would hit the ground running, and we had some initial expenditure and some initial sort of trying to get some traction that we struggled with. Now we're starting to see a real take-up of the service, and my feeling is that as word on the street, almost, that kind of people telling the good news stories about the service spreads, that I feel that by the end of the next cycle that we're going to be pretty much up to the projections that we originally made.
Yeah, I think we're heading that way, aren't we? I mean, startup costs have now been absorbed, and as awareness grows, and we had an absolute spike when we put a bit more oomph behind the awareness campaign, about 9 months ago now.
So we might even have a look at another awareness campaign actually.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and I agree. There's been activity, and it does seem that to the most part that activity has been positive. I guess one of the things that we should think about is in terms of raising that awareness, whether we're going to find a bouncing of activity coming from our patients.
Okay. What do you mean by that, Deborah?
Well, I'm concerned about whether we're going to see, patients bouncing from the service back to the GP, back to the outpatients.
That's a really good point, actually, because from a financial point of view, that is not good news. Yeah.
Okay. I hear your concerns, and I feel that you've both got some fairly strong views about how we kind of take this forward, and but I think we can agree that patient satisfaction is high. We've certainly seen a reduction in outpatient attendance. And I think there are some concerns of yours that we need to address going forward in terms of which of these paths that we take. So can we look a little bit more in detail about some of the figures, and then let's see if we reach some agreement about that going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I mean, I can respond to you about the case mix, actually.
Right.
Now you have watched part of the scene again. Take some time to consider what skills or behaviours might be required to occupy each of these four positions or speech acts. Here are some suggestions. Mover, speaking your true voice and encouraging others to do the same. Follower, listening as well as being an active participant. Opposer, respecting others' views and remaining curious. Bystander, suspending your certainties, empathy, summarising. A scenario where we may be required to occupy the mover position is when we need to make a compelling case or pitch a particular view. Let's have a look at the beginning of the move position, making a pitch.
I believe a good place for us to start today when we start to consider making a decision around this is to remind ourselves why we commissioned this service in the first place. And my sense of that is that we did that to meet the need that we have stated, the objective we stated as a CCG of taking more services out into the community to be nearer to where patients need them. Okay? I'm going to talk to you about activity, I'm going to talk to you about cost, and I'm going to talk to you about patient satisfaction. They're the three areas that I think we need to really carefully cover off when we're considering whether we recommission this service and how we recommission it. And I want to start with that final point around patient satisfaction. And I want to tell you a story of a patient that I had a conversation with the other day who has recently been through the service.
What did you like about this and why? Consider language, verbal and non-verbal, pace, tone and structure. A risk with any of these is what we might overplay or occupy the position to an unhelpful degree. What might this look and sound like for each of the positions? Here are some suggestions.
I think we need to look at this from a slightly different perspective.
How do you mean?
Well, I know from the patient perspective that they're very happy with the service, etc. I think from the business perspective, we need to think
yes,
about...
I had a feeling there'd be a but coming there. So let's not actually put the cart before the horse here. This is about patients. So it's no good saying, I hear that the patients are happy with this, but there's a commercial thing. Actually, making sure that we are putting patients at the heart of our decision making needs to be the first thing that we do. And I think that we're starting to lose sight of that, and we're starting to say, actually, the commercial stuff takes precedent. And I'm not sure that's a helpful thing to be doing here. What we need to be doing is starting to build the case, signing off on this service, and making sure that we can deliver for patients.
I think Debbie's trying to make another point, though, Adam.
Well, but it's not a point which I think is helpful at this point in the conversation. You know, we've gone through the four options, we've talked about them all, and I think it's absolutely clear to me that we need to be signing off on option number one and continuing with the service as it is.
Well, I think that we need to think about the benefits in terms of cost. We've said that cost reductions need to be...
It doesn't play out that way, Deborah, and I think the sooner you realise that, the better.
Right. Okay, then.
Mover could be seen as impatient, dictatorial, omnipotent.
I do think that there's an issue that we need to really consider about access. You know, it is unfair right across Lambeth. I mean, there are some areas where people can't access this eye service.
That's
you
a
know,
good point.
And it is a little bit like a postcode lottery in some respects.
Yeah, you have to think about the alternatives, though. You know, we've got two hospitals. We've got a whole series of points of access out in the community with this service. So actually, you know, the numbers in terms of, no, not numbers really. I just think in terms of the geographical spread, you know, us covering the patch, I think this is a much better option.
Yeah, it probably is, actually, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm concerned because, you know, yes, there were before this 2 hospitals, but at least people knew where they were going. I think the thing about it being right across the borough and not evenly distributed, is that it causes confusion for people.
So people don't know where to look for
Exactly.
help.
I mean, I think the signposting's been pretty good, and there is a plan in terms of how we get that sort of raising awareness piece out there to those areas where the service isn't as there's not been as much take up. So there is a plan there if we just give this more time.
So awareness would be beneficial. Yeah.
What's your view on this then, Susie?
Well, I mean, I think all these points are valid, aren't they?
Right.
Yeah. Do you feel you could take on some of the signposting going forward?
Well, I mean, what does everyone else think of that?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, I still think that we need to make sure that
Follower could be seen as passive, compliant, placating, over-accommodating.
Yeah, I mean, I think patient satisfaction is a really important part of this.
Yeah, well, hang on a minute. 28% of patients actually responded. So there's 72% of patients who have not given us any response to this whatsoever. So really, we're basing this on a very small number of people.
That is right. It was
and
We've
look,
got to base it
Adam,
on something. So
well, yeah, I agree, but let's base it on something that's a little bit more substantial than 28%. You're sitting there with your rose-tinted glasses. You remember what happened with the gynae service?
Okay.
And you pushed that through.
We're not talking about the... Okay. All right.
Yeah?
Okay. We're not talking about the gynae service.
Well, no, we're not talking about the gynae service, but I think that, again, you're doing that same thing, trying to push this through. And, again, I think that you really need to listen to the fact that there is more at stake here.
Deborah, I think we shouldn't make this personal. We're talking about a separate issue now, so can we just focus on those issues?
Absolutely. 28% is not enough.
Yeah.
In terms of to be able to make a decision as to whether this service should stay as it is. I think there's still issues that we need to look at. I don't think we can sit here and say, Adam, let's just keep it like this. No, we do need to look at it properly.
But nevertheless, in response to that 28%, the figures have been very high. The satisfaction rate has been very high.
Yeah, you're right. Customers.
Opposer could be seen as critical, competitive, blaming, attacking.
So what conditions are we including now in this?
Well, we keep the service as is, and we build. We roll it out.
Well, no, I do think that we do need to be including some other services. So if we are keeping the service and broadening it out, I think we need to think about how we can get cataracts used within this dealt with within the service, maybe glaucoma included in the service.
Yeah, because patient numbers are high, aren't they, within outpatients? So, yeah.
I just think if it isn't broken, let's not try and fix it. But Pete, what do you think?
Well, I think we need to agree one of these going forward.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a reasoned argument, isn't it? It's something that we need to debate.
Well, I think that we do need to include.
It just feels like it's a step too far for me at the moment. I think it's much more important that we concentrate on getting a good spread across the community rather than starting to bolt on added services at this point.
That good spread is important, isn't it?
Maybe we should agenda this for the next meeting. What do you think?
I think we're nearly there.
I'd like to get it thrashed out, really.
Okay, let's thrash.
Right.
I mean,
I just think that we need to think about how we can get the most out of our eye service.
Bystander could be seen as disengaged, judgmental, deserting, withdrawn. Take a moment now to consider if any of these might be moves or speech acts you favour, and if you might on occasion overplay the position. What circumstances might lead to this happening for you? If some of the positions are missing or vacant in a meeting, the conversation takes on an imbalanced quality and can become stuck in a cycle. Take a look at the following extracts from the meeting and try to identify the cycle you're seeing or which position or speech act is missing.
Look, at the end of the day, the situation is that Southwark also had a reduction. So
Yeah, but we're not talking about Southwark.
no, I know
so
we're not
I don't
talking about
understand why
Southwark,
you're
but the
bringing that
point
in.
of the matter is
Yeah.
that Southwark don't have an eye service, and yet they still had a significant reduction in patients.
Okay,
and
it's just that you seem really hung up on talking about Southwark, and
I'm not,
I'm much
but
more interested in making sure that we provide the service that we need.
Absolutely,
for
I
all the
don't have
patients that
I
we-
don't have a problem with that. But my point is that there is something else that we need to be looking at if both Lambeth and Southwark have a reduction in the number of
Okay,
patients
fine.
in
All right.
outpatients,
Okay,
and yet
even
they
if,
do not
just for a
have
minute,
a service.
Yeah. Okay. Well, all right.
like
I'll talk about
ours.
Southwark then for a minute.
So, you know-
if I can just, if I talk about Southwark for a minute, they have had a reduction. Fine.
Yeah.
But nowhere near the level of reduction.
But how
that
can
we
we
have in
even?
Lambeth.
How
So-
can you even put that?
What cycle are they stuck in here? Here, people are getting locked and stuck into an argument or disagreement while others look on. A move-oppose cycle. Now take a look at another.
One of the really important things for me is, I think, the predictability in terms of our expenditure on this. And that's one of the things that I think continuing with the service as it is looks after for us. We know how much it's going to cost. We know what the outlay is going to be.
Yep.
And the only thing that we're going to do really is start to derive greater benefit from the fact that there'll be increased take-up in the service.
Because we've invested now, haven't we?
Precisely.
So, yeah.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah, and beyond that, I think the other consideration is that the level of work that's going to be required in terms of putting the contracts together is really minimal. There's almost nothing that we're going to need to do in order to retain and maintain the service as it is.
Okay.
So bearing in mind everything else that's going on across the patch at the moment, the other responsibilities we've got, the new initiatives we're bringing in, it feels like this has got to be the way forward. Let's just sign off.
Cost
on
is an
service.
issue. That's good.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's it's the one thing that that can be predictable going forward when actually we've got many other
Precisely.
projects that are really unpredictable in their costs.
Yeah.
So it feels to me like we've got agreement on this in terms of a way forward.
Okay.
So should we have a vote?
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I
I
think
think we can
yeah.
probably vote.
Which position is missing here? Here, there is too much agreeing with the main spokesperson with not enough challenge, or nodding agreement while secretly disagreeing, missing the opposing position. And finally, which position is overrepresented here?
So really, I suppose that's the end of what I had to say. So the final pages 24 to 28, the appendices will give you the kind of where the data's come from. But in summary, it's option one that is the one that I think that we need to go ahead with. What do the rest of you think?
Well, thanks for that, Adam. I think we can all agree that was very comprehensive.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, sorry. What was the last point?
Well,
What was the last point? Yeah.
well, just about option one, whether we're happy to go ahead with that.
Oh yes, yeah.
Oh right, yeah.
Well, good.
I think we need to have a look at it, don't we, before
Yeah.
we decide.
Right.
So what page was that?
Okay. Well, if you go back to page 9, that's where it.
Oh right, okay.
Okay, page 9.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me get that up on my iPad. Page 9. Bear with me a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, that looks good. Yeah.
Which position is overrepresented here? Here, there is not enough participation and too many people standing on the sidelines of the conversation, too much bystanding. Consider if you recognise any of these cycles from your meetings. What could you do to unlock these cycles? Bringing this together, we have looked at the role of the mover, the opposer, the bystander, the follower, As people recognise these different roles and can act on this recognition, they can keep the conversation moving dynamically and create balance.
Yeah.
Is that enough to make
well,
it?
Yeah, I think we have to base it on something, don't we? So, you know, that's the data we've got available to us, and it's been tough to draw any more. I mean, it's been tough to get that data together, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I agree with Adam, actually. In terms of getting a sample of 28%, I think we've done pretty well.
I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's enough to prove our case
Right.
with any of the options. I think, you know, if we go to the board and say, look, we've got 28% and we're basing our move forward as a business based on that, I think they're going to laugh at us.
What would you suggest we should be doing then?
I think we need to go back to our patient population. I think we need to do much more research before we even make a decision here.
I'm with Susie on this. I think we need to look at that in a bit more detail.
Yeah.
Okay, so it certainly sounds like you two have some quite serious concerns about the level of how much data we've got to base the decision on.
Yes.
No, I agree with you actually. Yeah. Actually, Adam, it's a concern that we share that we need to address. Yeah.
What are your feelings, Deborah?
Well, what I'm hearing now is that we are not convinced that the sample we have is big enough to go to the board and have a conversation with. However, I just want to bring to the table that actually in terms of a sample size, it's bigger than we usually get.
That's true. That's absolutely true. I mean, we've made decisions on 10% less than this in terms of.
You're right.
Do you know
Okay,
what I propose? What I propose is that we make this a business case. We've got 28%. We've got some information that we can back this up with. I think we've got a strong case to go to the board and say that option one is a viable option. We are also looking at a couple of other little tweaks that we can put in to actually substantiate that.
Yeah, playing devil's advocate here. Okay, that's one option. Another option that I think might be worth looking at is bottoming out all of these options before we go to the board.
Okay.
So here, individuals are skillfully moving position to meet the needs of the conversation. The chair of a meeting, or indeed anyone who notices an imbalance, can show leadership by helping a conversation to happen in a more balanced, dynamic way. In other words, a leader can evoke people's genuine voices, listen deeply to the conversation, hold space for and respect as legitimate other people's views which oppose their own, bring perspective and awareness to the conversation. So a leader, a chair, or anyone using this 4-player system can create balance in a conversation by practicing all 4 of these qualities. More importantly, when seeing that these qualities are missing from a conversation, the leader will either fulfill these roles him or herself, or encourage others to take these roles. If we take a look at part of the original meeting one more time, you can see that Pete demonstrates how we can skillfully move positions to serve the conversation. He switches from a bystander into a mover speech act.
I hear your concerns, and I feel that you both got some fairly strong views about how we kind of take this forward. But I think we can agree that patient satisfaction is high. We've certainly seen a reduction in outpatient attendance. And I think there are some concerns of yours that we need to address going forward in terms of which of these paths that we take. So can we look a little bit more in detail about some of the figures, and then let's see if we reach some agreement about that going forward?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, I can respond to you about the case.
Did you spot that shift of position from Pete? The simple rule here is pay attention to the actions that are missing and provide them yourself, or encourage others to do so. Staying with the roles and responsibilities of the chair, what are some of the other skills, responsibilities and qualities required of this role? Take a moment now to think about what you consider key. Now compare your ideas to these suggestions. 1. Preparing well. 2. Leading the meeting, setting the tone, listening, questioning, summarising, ensuring decisions are made, ensuring everyone is heard and or contributes appropriately, assertiveness, empathy, energy, facilitating versus leading, ending positively. 3rd, following up. Now consider, how in tune are you with your team, organisation or system and what it needs? What does your system silence or disable? When you speak, how conscious are you of the position you speak from? How well do you play all 4 roles, especially in high-stakes situations? What can you do you need to do to be even more flexible in your conversations? Finally, it might interest you to note that what we've explored here is the first of 3 domains of Cantor's model. If you'd like to find out more about his work on structural dynamics, his book, Reading the Room, would be a good place to start, and there are plenty of other resources on the internet. Thank you for participating in this video workshop. If you'd like more support around running effective meetings, either as a chair or as a meeting attendee, please talk to the Organisational Development team.